I'd like to do a little brief video looking at economic inequality. Sound.
It's muted on the bottom right-hand corner.
Okay. Oh, it's muted. Oh, yeah.
My head. A Harvard business professor and economist. There's a chart I saw recently that I can't get out of my head. A Harvard business professor and economist asked more than 5,000 Americans how they thought wealth was distributed in the United States. This is what they said they thought it was. Dividing the country into 5 rough groups of the top, bottom, and middle 3 20% groups, they asked people how they thought the wealth in this country was divided. Then he asked them what they thought was the ideal distribution. And 92%, that's at least 9 out of 10 of them, said it should be more like this. In other words, more equitable than they think it is. Now that fact is telling, admittedly, the notion that most Americans know that the system is already skewed unfairly. But what's most interesting to me is the reality compared to our perception. The ideal is as far removed from our perception of reality as the actual distribution is from what we think exists in this country. So ignore the ideal for a moment. Here's what we think it is again. And here is the actual distribution. Shockingly skewed. Not only do the bottom 20% and the next 20%, the bottom 40% of Americans barely have any of the wealth. I mean, it's hard to even see them on the chart. But the top 1% has more of the country's wealth than 9 out of 10 Americans believe the entire top 20% should have. Mind-blowing. But let's look at it another way, because I find this chart kind of difficult to wrap my head around. Instead, let's reduce the 311 million Americans to just a representative 100 people. Make it simple. Here they are. Teachers, coaches, firefighters, construction workers, engineers, doctors, lawyers, some investment bankers, a CEO, maybe a celebrity or two. Now let's line them up according to their wealth. Poorest people on the left, wealthiest on the right, just a steady row of folks based on their net worth. We'll color code them like we did before based on which 20% quintile they fall into. Now let's reduce the total wealth of the United States, which was roughly $54 trillion in 2009, to this symbolic pile of cash. And let's distribute it among our 100 Americans. Well, here's socialism, all the wealth of the country distributed equally. We all know that won't work. We need to encourage people to work and work hard to achieve that good old American dream and keep our country moving forward.
Okay. I don't know if you remember last time, I did something simple. This is much more interesting than what I did last time. That is, we looked at the distribution of both income and wealth according to quintiles, the fifths of the population. And that's what he's talking about right there. This is now looking at the society divided into 5 equal-sized groups. If we're totally equal, obviously each group would have 20% of all wealth.
So, here's that ideal we asked everyone about. Something like this curve. This isn't too bad. We've got some incentive, as the wealthiest folks are now about 10 to 20 times better off than the poorest Americans. But hey, even poor folks aren't actually poor, since the poverty line has stayed almost entirely off the chart. We have a super healthy middle class with a smooth transition into wealth. And yes, Republicans and Democrats alike chose this curve. 9 out of 10 people, 92%, said this was a nice, ideal distribution of America's wealth. But let's move on. This is what people think America's wealth distribution actually looks like. Not as equitable, clearly, but for me, even this still looks pretty great. Yes, the poorest 20 to 30% are starting to suffer quite a lot compared to the ideal, and the middle class is certainly struggling more than they were, while the rich and wealthy are making roughly 100 times that of the poorest Americans, and about 10 times that of the still healthy middle class. Sadly, this isn't even close to the reality. Here is the actual distribution of wealth in America. The poorest Americans don't even register. They're down to pocket change. And the middle class is barely distinguishable from the poor. In fact, even the rich between the top 10 and 20 percentile are worse off. Only the top 10% are better off. And how much better off? So much better off that the top 2 to 5% are actually off the chart at this scale. And the top 1%, this guy, well, his stack of money stretches 10 times higher than we can show. Here's his stack of cash, restacked, all by itself. This is the top 1% we've been hearing so much about. So much green in his pockets that I have to give him a whole new column of his own, because he won't fit on my chart. 1% of America has 40% of all the nation's wealth. The bottom 80%, 8 out of every 10 people, or 80 out of these 100, only has 7% between them. And this has only gotten worse in the last 20 to 30 years. While the richest 1% take home almost a quarter of the national income today, in 1976, they took home only 9%, meaning their share of income has nearly tripled in the last 30 years. The top 1% own half the country's stocks, bonds, and mutual funds. The bottom 50% of Americans own only 0.5% of these investments, which means they aren't investing. They're just scraping by. I'm sure many of these wealthy people have worked very hard for their money. But do you really believe that the CEO is working 380 times harder than his average employee? Not his lowest paid employee, not the janitor, but the average earner in his company. The average worker needs to work more than a month to earn what the CEO makes in 1 hour. We certainly don't have to go all the way to socialism to find something that is fair for hardworking Americans. We don't even have to achieve what most of us consider might be ideal. All we need to do is wake up and realize that the reality in this country is not at all what we think it is.
All right, so that's a much more dramatic and more interesting way of presenting the same thing I presented last time. So let's go back to what I did present last time. So remember, graphic growing economic inequality in the United States. And the disturbing thing is almost every time we come back to measure it, it keeps getting more and more unequal. I know these are dry, boring statistics. At least that brief video made it a little more interesting. But these are statistics that we can read in the lives of people around us and in your own.
Your YouTube's on autoplay.
Oh, this is Robert Reich. Oh, that reminds me. I said if you watch Robert Reich, who's a professor at UC Berkeley's film, Inequality for All, write a one-page response for that, 5 little extra credit points added to a single quiz score. That is also due, just before we go on break for Thanksgiving. You want to get it done, you want those extra credit points now. I know you get loaded up this time of the year, but some people need to get any extra credit points they can get. So watch the Reich video, write a one-page response, 5 little extra credit points. But everything, let me emphasize this because I forgot to do it earlier as well. Everything, any makeup of paper. Remember, I'm still allowing people to do paper number 1, so they at least get a couple points on it, so they can then, with their last paper, get out of taking the final. All of that stuff, any makeups, have to be done as of Tuesday of next week, because when we come back, it's the last week, and I want everything in before we go on Thanksgiving break. Is that very clear? So if anybody's still thinking about doing that first paper, yeah, you still can. But it is due on Tuesday. So everything's now loaded up, as it usually is during this time of year. And I know you got stuff going on your calculus final and your Mandarin final, all that kind of stuff. But that's what I expect in this class. Okay. No questions about that stuff. Okay. So again, look. No. Yeah, you can read these dry, boring statistics in the people standing on street corners with little signs. Yeah, I know. It says, I'll work for food, and we all know they don't really want either. 1, they don't want to work, and 2, they don't really want after food. What are they after? Money for? Drugs, alcohol. Okay. But There are children being raised by people like that. Your exercise involves going out to the world. It's not hard in San Diego to find a hell of a lot of homeless people. Go down to the ballpark, and they're just piled up like so much human trash. I went down here a few weeks ago. I was part of an organization, and we got a special deal. We had people going to the ballpark for a ball game, and we had a bunch of lunches left over. We had probably something like 500 lunches that we didn't use. We're going to the ballpark. And so we loaded up a van and decided we'd just drive around that area, because there's tons of homeless people. We figured it'd take us, maybe a half an hour, and drive around, giving out the remaining lunches to the homeless people. We made one stop, and they just came from everywhere. I mean, they were lined up, they were surrounding the van, and the van with 500 lunches was emptied in less than 5 minutes. Whoa. And here's the thing, I know you just take that for granted. Those are kind of like people like this kind of trash that blows on the streets, and it's always been there, but it has not. No, it has not. I'm old enough to remember a time when those kind of people didn't exist like that. We've always had poorly housed Americans, but at least they had a roof over their head. Maybe it was a crummy. We used to call it flop houses. It's technically called a single room occupancy hotel, SRO. You got a room, you shared a bathroom with maybe 15 other people down the hall. You walked into your room, you closed the door, you probably didn't have a light switch. You had a light on a wire hanging down. You turn on the light, you screwed the light bulb in. You turn off the light, you screwed the light bulb out. That was pretty sucky. But at least the roof over your head. We didn't have those kind of people on those streets that you will find so easy to find. And here for me is even more disturbing. I think I've told you, I'm the County Board of Education. Actually, I'm currently the president of the County Board of Education. And we oversee the most vulnerable children in San Diego County's education. You get kicked out of La Jolla High, you get expelled from Hoover, you come to the county to be educated. The county runs the juvenile justice system. You get caught dealing drugs as a 16-year-old, you're in jail, but you still have to get educated. County Board of Education oversees that. There is a school devoted solely to the homeless children, the Monarch School. That's over close to the ballpark. What a coincidence. And then, of course, up in North County, there's SPA, as we call it, San Pasquale Academy, and that's just for foster youth. The Monarch School, I think I may have told you about this before. Remember the little girl sleeping under trucks at night? That's where her mommy puts her, to be safe. 22,000 children like that in San Diego County alone. 22,000. That's the official data. I get told all the time as president of the Board of Education, 22,000 children like that. Can we realistically expect those kids to go out and compete with children of affluence, the people, that 1% and stuff piled up like that? I recommend a book to you. It's a depressing book, but it's highly insightful by one of the most foremost scholars in America today, a guy named Robert Putnam. It's called Our Kids. And what he looks at is the impact of growing economic inequality on children in the United States. It's horrendous. What's happening to children. This is not just some dry abstract statistic. And this actually affects